Hi everybody, welcome back to Unit 5 of Venture Development School and the Test Your Business Model class. Today we're going to talk a little bit about key resources and key partners, which are the two of the boxes of the business model canvas that are on the left side, which we haven't talked about yet. Speaking of that, here's the business model canvas right here. So what we've talked about so far are the customer segments. That's the first box we talked about. Value propositions, which was box number 2. We talked about channels. Channels are the way we deliver our message to our customers. And we've talked about customer relationships, which are how we keep and grow our customers, knowing that expanding our revenues from an existing customer is less expensive than going out and finding a new customer. We've also talked about revenue streams. We've talked about strategies and tactics for how we can capture monetary value from our customers while we deliver our value propositions to those particular customers. So that wraps up the front side, the customer-facing side of the business model canvas. And as we talk about this in kind of the midway point of this class, remember to keep in mind that all of these other boxes can be really, really challenging if you don't have the right customer segments and the right value propositions. So even though we're going on to the other sections of the canvas, we really want you to continue to concentrate. Are the customers that I'm talking to the right customers? Do they have an urgent, unmet need that I can fulfill? And then what is the numeric value proposition for why I can solve their problem and why they should purchase the solution from me rather than the other competitors? And what you've probably found at this stage in the course is that the more on track you are with your customer segments and your value propositions, the easier it is to fill out the rest of the canvas. So if you're struggling with the other boxes, that may be an indication that your customer segments and your value propositions are a little bit off. So always go back to customers and value propositions and make sure that your interviews are giving you validation that the problem you're solving for the right group of people is on track. With that, we'll start talking about the back side of the canvas. This is what's happening behind closed doors. This is backstage. This is the back of the shop or the back of the office where we have to figure out all of the different partnerships and activities and resources and costs that are going to go into providing our solution to our customers or our value to our customers. So what we're going to talk about today are key resources and key partners. We're going to start a little bit. I can't remember actually which one we're starting with. I think we're starting with key partners, which is 6, and key resources, which is 7. And there's a lot of connections that we can draw between our key partners and our key resources, just like we did between our customer segments and our value propositions. So here we go. First question I have for you today is, who likes NASCAR? Okay, now I'll admit that when I teach this class in person, there's not always a lot of hands that go up. I don't know if people don't like NASCAR or if the ones who do like NASCAR are afraid to raise their hands. So then I usually follow up with a question, well, who doesn't like NASCAR, right? You've got cars going around in circles really, really fast, lots of wrecks. It's really exciting. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of car racing and a little bit of NASCAR activity. So how does that relate to key resources and key partners? Well, here are the questions that we have to ask ourselves going into this section. What do we need to make this company go? What are the resources that our value propositions require? And our message channels and our customers and our revenues. A lot of key resources go into answering all of those questions. Similarly, our key partners, what do we need to make this company go? Who is also part of the supply chain that we're a part of? whose business cards do we need to be able to deliver our product to our customer? So we want to keep all of those things in mind as we start to go through the examples for today. But the trick to these two blocks, these two parts of the Canvas, and why I teach them in the same lesson is because they're actually really similar. And when I first started using the Canvas, I found it pretty confusing. What's the difference between a partner and a resource? Can a partner be a resource? Can a resource be a partner? It was pretty confusing. And I actually had to use Post-it notes because I had a lot of partners and a lot of resources that were going back and forth between those two blocks. So as we go back to those key questions that we had right here, I really want to emphasize the first two words of those questions. Key resources are the what, and key partners are the who that help us make our company go. So here's our topic for the day. The Danica Patrick GoDaddy.com website hosting NASCAR. And I like to use the GoDaddy example because it's one of our local homegrown companies here. And it's a Chevy, which is my favorite brand of car. And Danica Patrick being the only female NASCAR race car driver, I think it's a cool story. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Danica Patrick car today. So going back to these questions, what does it take to have a race team? Who does it take to have a race team? This is the startup that we're going to talk about a little bit today. There's your question right there. What do we need to run a race team? What do we need? Well, usually in class, people raise their hand and say, well, we probably need cars. We probably need tires. Probably need engines. It's kind of hard to believe that the cars don't actually come with the engines in this particular example. So we need engines and tires to go on the cars. We need haulers because all of our races are at different racetracks, so we have to haul things around. We've got to have tools. We've got to have engineers. We've got to have a pit crew. We've got to have parts. We've got to have sponsors. And of course, we have to have a driver. So these are 10 things that would kind of come to the top of our list in terms of what we need to run a race team. So here's my pictures here. There's my cars. There's my tires. There's my engines. There's my hauler. There's my tools. There's my engineers off to the right side of that picture. We've got our pit crew. It's a good-looking group there. We've got parts. We've got our driver. We've got our sponsor. And there we go. Okay? Here are all the things, the what's, the things that we need to run a race team. And what we found out with a particular race team is that these different things fall into 4 categories. We have physical resources, physical assets. We have intellectual resources. We have human resources. There's that key term there you might think about, human resources. And we have financial resources. So in these 4 categories, all of the things that we listed that are the major categories or the major items that we need to run a race team fall into these 4 sections. So our physical resources are our cars, our engines, our tires, our haulers, our parts, and our tools. Our intellectual resources are our engineers, maybe any patents that we have, any things that help us make those cars go faster under the conditions that they're under. We've got human resources. Sometimes those are the engineers, but the human resources also include our driver, who is the poster child for our race team, as well as the guys behind the pit wall that do all of the dirty work when the race is going on. So there's our pit crew. Our financial resources, in this particular case, are our sponsor. So what we talk about in key resources are things that we own. They're physical things, intellectual things, human things, and financial things. All of these things that we own are internal to our company. These are the things that we have to have in our company if we're going to be able to perform, if we're going to be able to provide a value proposition to our customers. The key partners are more of the who, whereas as we just saw, our key resources are the things that we need. The key partners are the people or the organizations outside of our own business that we need to be able to go. So we'll take those away and try to answer the question, who do we need? Or if you look at the diagram on the business model canvas, you'll see with the key partners icon that you've got a couple of wedding rings there, a couple of rings that are interlocked. And so sometimes when we talk about the key partners, we talk about who are we married to? Who do we have to have that's outside our organization that we can't survive without? Our business doesn't exist without these key partners that are outside our own organization. So we're going to talk about that in terms of our NASCAR example. But what we have to think about in terms of the business and our race team is who is the business? Who is the race team? And so if you're familiar at all with NASCAR, you know that most race teams have a bigger race team or an owner that has multiple cars. So in this particular case, Stewart-Haas Racing is the race organization, the ownership group that owns these 4 different cars. And you'll see why I'm talking about this in a minute. But if you zoom in on this picture, you'll see on the front left fender of each one of those cars is this little Stewart-Haas Racing logo. And so what we've found out is that in our particular case, our race team is part of a much bigger business. And I'll show you how that relates to key partners in a second. So let's answer this question again. Our key partners, without blank, we can't exist. If we're a race team in NASCAR, who do we have to have in order to be able to do what we do? So this is kind of a broad question, but again, we have to think about the key partners that are involved in our little business, our little part of the organization. So what we talk about here is obviously without NASCAR, Stewart-Haas Racing probably doesn't exist, at least not in this particular type of form. So NASCAR could be a key partner for our race team. One of the other key partners, really big part of NASCAR are the television contracts. So it's interesting that even though we don't necessarily think about NASCAR as being a really popular sport, all 4 major networks all have a section of the race season that they broadcast on their channels. So you've got Fox, NASCAR on Fox, you've got NASCAR on ESPN, which is part of the ABC television group, which is actually owned by Disney. You've got NASCAR on NBC, which is Universal NBC, a much larger company. And then you've got NASCAR on TNT, which is actually the Turner CBS television group. So all 4 major networks have television contracts with NASCAR. So those folks are actually key partners for our little racing business as well. And then we also have to have places to race. So when you start talking about Daytona International Speedway, our own PIR, Phoenix International Raceway, just outside of town here, all of these racetracks across the country are also key partners, because if we don't have racetracks, we can't race. So here are some organizations that we can consider key partners that are outside our organization, but that we depend on. So I'll say that again for you and your startup. Your key partners are organizations outside of your own startup business that you depend on to be able to exist. So when we talk about that, we translate that over to our key partners in our business model canvas. If you were going to business model canvas a race team, we've got a lot of key partners that include NASCAR and television contracts, race teams. We actually also have a lot of other key partners, which would be partners like Chevrolet, Ford, Toyota, all have race teams. Goodyear is the official tire of NASCAR, so every single tire on the NASCAR circuit is going to be a tire provided by Goodyear. And you have some other key partners, which in our particular case, to provide our engines for our business, is Hendrick Motorsports. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what you see here is, in many cases, our suppliers, which are key partners, supply some of our tools and our resources, which also go in that box. So as I showed you earlier on the first canvas we looked at today, you've got some relationships here between key partners and key resources. Many of those key partners are suppliers of the things that we need to be able to build and execute on our product. So as we look to our key partners today, we talk about people who may be non-competitors where we have strategic alliances. So for Stewart-Haas Racing is using all Chevrolet cars. So there may be a Chevy relationship or a key strategic alliance that we work with Chevy on making our cars handle better and work faster. We have maybe co-opetition. Now, what do we mean by co-opetition? As I mentioned a second ago, our particular race team in this example buys all of their engines from Hendrick Motorsports. Hendrick Motorsports also has 4 cars that race on the NASCAR circuit. So even though we compete against them on every Sunday or every Saturday when we race, we actually share a lot of information about how the engines worked and how well they performed, because that actually provides us kind of a strategic advantage and a wider sample of engines where we can get better performance and do information sharing. So co-opetition, we may have key partners who we compete against, but that also we purchase or we buy equipment from. And we can talk about some other examples of that in a minute. Joint ventures. So joint ventures may also be key partners. In this particular example of Stewart-Haas Racing, there is an engine component manufacturer called Haas Automation, and Haas Automation is a separate company that is also in the automotive industry, but provides us some data and some information about how our cars can perform. So as we look at key partners, we may have a similar sister company that is also in the same type of business that we're in that can provide us information and data and parts for our cars that help us perform better. And of course, number 4 is kind of the obvious one, the buyer-supplier relationships, like with Goodyear Tires. Just because Goodyear is a sponsor of NASCAR doesn't mean that they give away all those tires to those competitors for free. All of the competitors have to pay for the tires that they go through. And so you may have a buyer-supplier relationship. In this case, NASCAR is required to buy all those tires from Goodyear. So we find that through the NASCAR example, there's some pretty good examples of key partners, people who are outside our organization that we depend on to be able to deliver our product. By buying cars from Chevy, by buying engines from Hendrick Motorsports, by having joint ventures or cooperative companies that are also under the same parent company that provide us some of the tools and parts that we need, and even a buyer-supplier relationship that helps us with getting other people or other supplies for our business. So what we talk about with key partners, these are all people that we need, that we depend on to deliver our product. So what that brings us to here is kind of almost the final version of the business model canvas, which gives you sort of a summary or a cheat sheet about the things that belong in each box. What we've talked about today are key resources, things that we own. I've got one of my mentors that says, the key resource is what makes us, us. What makes us who we are? And I think that's really a great analogy for the key resources. These are the physical, these are the intellectual, these are the financial, and these are the human resources that we have to make our company who we are. Our key partners are people that we depend on, that we absolutely have to have if we're going to be able to exist. So it's always good to remember that we're part of a bigger supply chain, and we're right here somewhere in the middle, and our customers may be actual end users, or they may be other businesses that provide value to the end customer. And we have suppliers who make stuff that we use, and we're just kind of right here in the middle. And what we find with startups is that the more focused that we can be on doing what we do well and forming partnerships with people upstream from us who are suppliers and downstream from us who are often other businesses or sometimes the end user. But if we can really do what we do really, really well, then that's going to give us a much better chance of being successful. And a lot of times we think that we have to do the whole thing from beginning to end. And successful startups typically are ones that they know what they do, and they provide great partnerships, they find great partnerships with people upstream and downstream where they can create relationships, contracts, and let those people do what they do well as well. So this is sort of our overall map. Next time we're going to wrap up with key activities and cost structures, and we'll have all of that put together in the full business model canvas, which I think you'll find is hopefully, once you've been taught, is actually a pretty easy and neat tool to use. So last but not least, as we talk about in NASCAR, go out and do your interviews, go like hell, and don't forget to turn left. We'll see you next time.